Gotcha.
So it is 5:30, and as people start to trickle in, I will go ahead and give my introduction. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the May 2021 Charlottesville Board of Architectural Review virtual meeting. We should now be live on Channel 10, and we're continuing to stream on the city's social media channels. My name is Robert Watkins. I'm city staff, and I will be moderating tonight's meeting, at least on the virtual side of things. Before I hand things over to Carl Schwartz, our chair, I'm going to go over a few guidelines and housekeeping tips to make sure that tonight's meeting runs smoothly for everybody participating. So first, for everybody who might be watching from home, I will introduce the meeting participants who are online right now. First, we have Carl Schwartz, our chair. We're also joined by Brett Gastinger, the vice chair. Other BAR members include Tim Moore, Sherry Lewis, James Zemer, Andy McClure, and Robert Edwards. Members Ron Bailey and Jody Lahendro aren't able to join us this evening. And we're also joined by Jeff Werner, who is my colleague and city staff. Throughout the meeting, applicants and other participants will join the meeting as necessary. For members of the public who are on the call right now who'd like to provide comments, we ask that you register for the meeting through the city calendar, which is on the city website, and then you can join through Zoom or you can call in. There are a couple of different public comments portions of the meeting, which our chair will clarify. But when it comes to that point and you wish to provide comment, you can raise your hand using the raise hand feature, or if you're calling in, you can press *9. For applicants who are online already, you are currently in the meeting as an attendee, which means that you have limited audio and video capabilities. When your project comes up on the agenda for review, I will promote you to panelist so that you'll have mute and unmute capabilities and we can see you. When I promote you from attendee to panelist, you'll be booted out of the meeting temporarily and you'll come back automatically as a panelist. So just hang tight for that. Also to applicants, during the staff and applicant presentations for each project, I will be sharing my own screen to scan through pages of your application that you submitted for visual aid for the board. While the BAR deliberates, I'm happy to share my screen again to reference specific pages or drawings, and just give me a page number when you want me to go to an illustration or a drawing. Also, like we've done in the past, we will have short periodic breaks as needed, and our chair will direct us to when those are necessary. With that, it is time for me to hand things over to our chair, Carl Schwartz, but please let me know if you have any other questions in the meantime. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Welcome to this regular monthly meeting of the Charlottesville Board of Architectural Review. Staff will introduce each item, followed by the applicant's presentation, which should not exceed 10 minutes. I will then ask for questions from the public, followed by questions from the BAR. After questions are closed, I'll ask for comments from the public. For each application, members of the public are each allowed 3 minutes to ask questions and 3 minutes to offer comments. Speakers shall identify themselves and provide their address. Comments should be limited to the BAR's purview, that is regarding only the exterior aspects of the project. Following the BAR's discussion and prior to taking action, the applicant will have up to 3 minutes to respond. Thank you for participating. So now we have matters from the public not on the agenda. And I just want to make clear that there is going to be a moment or a time at the end of the agenda to speak about the statues, if that's what you wish to talk about. So please reserve your comments until after we've gotten through. We only have one item on the agenda before the statues. So yeah, if you could just please wait until after that is done, we will have an opportunity for the public to speak. If you have comments about the consent agenda, which includes 503 Rugby Road and 167 Chancellor Street, now would be the time to speak.
So if you'd like to provide comment right now, please raise your hand by pressing *9 if you're calling in or using the raise hand feature in the participant tab. Looking at the list, Carl, I'm not seeing any raised hands.
Great. All right, so like I said, the consent agenda consists of our meeting minutes from January 20th, 503 Rugby Road and 167 Chancellor Street. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Sherry.
Second.
Thank you. I will call a vote. Mr. Gastinger,
Aye.
Mr. Edwards,
Aye.
thank you. Miss Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz,
Yes.
Mr. Zemer,
Aye.
Mr. McClure,
Yes.
and Mr. Moore.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
All right, so now we move on to 605 Preston Place.
And I will go ahead and promote the Mitchell Matthews team. So Kevin and John.
Unmute. All right, everyone. This is, let me get to the top of this, sorry. This is a COA request for a 3-story apartment building at 605 Preston Place. This property is within the Rugby Road University Circle Venable neighborhood ADC district. And it also is an IPP. The city designated it as an IPP several years prior to establishing the district. This property is what remains of Windhurst, or not, I guess, the house to the north of it, but this is the house there known as Windhurst. It was the manor house of a 100-acre farm that is now the Preston Heights section of the city. The typical 2-story, 3-bay, double pile, white weatherboard glass house with revival details. It is situated sideways on the remaining parcel, facing south, basically facing the back of the brick apartment buildings there on Grady Avenue. So again, this is COA request for construction of an apartment building, including parking, landscaping, and site improvements. I've summarized in the staff report the materials, some of the details, the lighting, color palette, landscaping. I know that when the parking lot was discussed, there were questions about the landscaping. There are 2 large cedars on the west side that will be retained. Construction will remove 6 trees, 36-inch oak, 3 8-inch dogwood, a maple, and one described simply as tree. There will be, the new planning includes 15 trees, black gum, shagbark hickory, and white fringe tree. I've addressed the landscaping per review of the city's master tree list. White fringe tree is not identified on the list. However, it is identified. In fact, the Virginia Native Plant Society named it the Wildflower of the Year in 1997. Mr. Gastinger can maybe shed some light on that. If you want to stay out. So it said the parking below grade access will be off of Preston Place on the west side. There will be a couple parking spaces still on the surface there. Some questions that have been raised about the historic designation, so that we're all clear. And Windhurst, that being the house and the property, is listed on the Virginia Landmarks Register and on the National Register of Historic Places, both as an individual site and also as a contributing structure to the Rugby Road University Corner Historic District. And that's the historic district on the state and federal listing. Being a contributing structure on the state and national register carries no less importance than being individually listed. So to be clear, so the term for when contributing structures are used in the national and state register, it's to express that a district is important due to the sum of its contributing parts. However, Windhurst being individually listed on the state and national register certainly expresses the importance of the resource in and of itself. But the thing that matters relative to the BAR's purview and oversight is that local designation. And back in September last year, you all held a preliminary discussion. Include the notes in the staff report if you want to refer to them. Some of them are a bit informal, but still in general, the applicant walked away. The primary question was, is this thing, is it worth bringing back to the BAR, or is it dead on arrival? And the response was, that you all would consider it. So you didn't say you would approve or anything. You said, you would consider it further. As I mentioned, I went through this. I've spent a lot of time looking at this relative to the design guidelines, simply different circumstances from what was presented in the parking lot. One of the things that will be raised certainly is the encroachment of this structure onto the historic house. And we can, you all have guidelines that begin to address that, but to be clear, when it comes to new structures, the guidelines are fairly clear about allowing things that are complementary but of a more contemporary design. And then as far as on the street side or the side setbacks, there's the guidelines talk about what a general range, and so looking at this, the front setback is relatively consistent with this side of the street. It's almost identical to the setback that Windhurst on the other side is set back from Preston Place. So this isn't up on the road. And it's certainly, there are other properties in Preston Place that are set further back, but you all can see in the staff report, I felt like it's generally fits relative to that. Same with spacing, the massing and the footprint. I think that the numbers in this would be, the square footage of the footprint itself. It seems to relate to the majority of the surrounding structures there. Height and width, certainly this is a taller structure. The guidelines say that the height and width should be within a maximum of 200% of the prevailing width. So most of the things there are 1.5, 2 stories, certainly at the 4-story apartments, but 200% of 2 stories is 4 stories. So at 3, this is within that height. The width is within the guidelines. Materials and design, it's brick consistent. I think it's got a again, a contemporary design, but the shutters kind of bring a something that reflects what you see with the other houses around the court there. Brick and stucco, wood features. The color palette, I think, is somewhat subdued, if you will. It's not a bright white stucco or bright white siding. So I think it fits a little bit better than something that jumps out. Talked about the landscaping, lighting levels. Everything seems to fall within at least what was presented. They have lamping that's available within our guidelines, but I think that you all should make clear in any motion that the lamping will comply, and that would be the dimmable color temperature not to exceed 3000 K, color rendering not less than 80, preferably not less than 90. I also, because in the parking lot discussion that was referenced back to the Secretary of Standards for treatment of historic properties, I've included that in here relative to designing new on-site features. So you can refer to those directly. Does say designing new exterior additions to historic buildings or adjacent new construction that are, and this is what is recommended, that they should be compatible with the historic character of the site and preserve the historic relationship between the building or buildings and the landscape. I think we all can acknowledge that the historic landscape of Windhurst is somewhat been eliminated, except for the site where what's left, and to what extent that how you interpret that in that site in the context of these guidelines. That's for your discussion. The staff does recommend it if approval is considered. I will say I think there are still some things that need to be answered. There's some questions. I think the folks in the neighborhood are going to ask some questions. So this may not be heading for approval tonight, but certainly I wanted to say that staff would recommend that, again, the comment about the lamping. We always look for an opportunity with new projects to underground the electrical service. So that could be pursued. And also there are some existing stone walls. Now they may be within the public right of way, but I think we need to clarify that the curb at the stone curbs, any remnants of stone walls, regardless of being the public right of way, at the apartments just south of this, we had a lot of damage to the curbs, and so the BAR should address that and require documentation prior to any construction, and that if anything's damaged, that it's repaired or reconstructed in order to get the final inspection. I wanted to say that no site plan has been submitted for this. One will be required. So you all know that when a site plan goes through, often there's issues, utilities, et cetera, causes something to move or change or be modified. So again, in consideration of COA, please understand that there might be subsequent revisions or modifications to what was reviewed. And I think you all should make clear that that could very well require a new application for you all to review. And then finally, I'm looking at this somewhat similar to the court's project over at Levy Building. This site, at least according to the available maps, appears to be undisturbed, at least since 1920. And in the city's comp plan, we do recommend that during land disturbing activities, that developers are encouraged to undertake archaeological investigations. And also the Secretary standards, which reference in the guidelines, they also recommended archaeological resources be protected. So phase one, and I don't know how archaeological level survey made it through spell check with a K, but my apologies there. But some discussion might be had of recommending a phase one archaeological survey of the site. And with that, I ask if there's any questions. I know the applicants are here to make their presentation. So any questions for me? Sorry, a lot going on there. All right, all yours, Robert.
So Kevin or John, I'm happy to go through your application if you'd like to present something, but just let me know when you want me to change pages.
Okay, great. Thanks, Robert. Hi, my name's Kevin Riddle. I'm representing the owner of this project. I have John Matthews here with me, so if you hear him pipe in, don't be alarmed. I can go through the packet pretty quickly. Jeff's summary was great. Thanks, Jeff. It's a proposal for a small apartment building, 3 stories. We did bring this to you informally back in September of 2020. And it's evolved quite a bit since then. The significant changes would involve the parking. Originally, we had proposed a lane that would cross from west to east, connecting Preston Place along the southern boundary. And we had parking that was partly under the building, the south side of the building. We have changed course, and now the parking is located under the building. And it's accessed from a single drive at the northwest portion of the property. So Robert, if we look at the site plan, maybe we could just advance to that. We can talk about this, and even actually maybe if we go to the plan at the parking level, that's I think 2 pages down from this one. There we go. So you can see where cars can enter the site from Preston Place and then park most of them under the building. There are 3 spaces that are out at the end of the drive. So the parking is mostly concealed from view. we also, if now you go back to the site plan, Robert, 2 pages previous. The outline of the building, the footprint and the massing, they've been refined and evolved rather significantly since our last meeting. It's a building that's stepped back its northern wing from the southern wing, and there's a large stair that accesses the apartments in a deep recess. And so from the front, from Preston Place, looking from the west toward the building, what you see appears to be kind of 2 volumes, more so than a single building. As Jeff mentioned, there are quite a number of shallow balconies, and since we first brought the project in September, we have had a number of meetings on site. We've met with the neighbors, I believe, on at least 4 occasions. So we've had this out there, and we've been discussing our process with everybody who lives nearby as much as we can. And we've listened to the neighbors. We certainly haven't accommodated all of their concerns with the changes here, but we've tried to address what we can while still keeping the project viable. Some other things to mention, the 2 most prominent trees on the site are these Deodora cedars that are at the southwest, and we plan to keep those trees and do our utmost during construction to preserve them. Trash cans will be located underneath the building, except on trash day, so they'll be out of the way. There's a couple of transformers that currently are located out pretty close to Preston Place, and those would be relocated further in and largely concealed by the landscaping. The site immediately adjacent to Windhurst, we don't plan on doing very much there. There are some plantings proposed, but by and large, the intent here is to leave it largely as it was for decades, since the 1920s up until recent construction. So there's a rather short lawn in front of it. We do show a modest path of stones that would lead around Windhurst and back to a couple of parking spaces that are there at the northeast off of Preston Place. And then as Jeff mentioned, the materials in the proposed new building, we believe them to be compatible with what's elsewhere in the neighborhood. And I think the illustrations largely speak for themselves. So I'll leave it there, and we look forward to your comments. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Kevin. So first we're going to go, are there any questions from the public? Please raise your hand or press *9. And bear in mind, there'll be a chance for comments in about 2 or 3 minutes once we're done with questions.
I see a comment from Paul Wright, so I will go ahead and allow him to talk. Paul, once you still have to unmute yourself once I allow you to talk.
And Paul, please give your address when you speak.
Sure. My name is Paul Wright. I live at 612 Preston Place, and I'd just like to comment a bit about the balconies. It was said that many of our concerns were addressed, and I personally don't know how that was done in the drawings that I've seen, and I'd like them to address how our concerns about the balconies were addressed. Thank you.
Noise from the balconies.
Thank you, Paul. Any other questions?
Nope.
All right. Kevin, if you want to respond, or you don't have to, or we can go right to questions from the board.
Oh, I would just say that if I said explicitly that many of the concerns were addressed, I guess I didn't mean to phrase it that way. I don't think I did, but I think I said that we couldn't accommodate all of the issues and concerns that the neighbors raised, but we did do our utmost to listen and address them in part.
Questions from the board?
So, Carl,
Mhm.
I don't know what point you want to review the letter that was sent, and Robert.
Oh, when we get to comments, but yeah, I will.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll read that out. Thank you for reminding me. Got it somewhere on my screen.
I've got a question. Kevin, has there been any arborist assessment of the 36-inch oak that is on site that is to be removed?
We do have an arborist report, and we can pass that along. My understanding is that the existing trees on site that are to be removed are, they're pretty far along, and they don't have a lot of life left.
Thank you.
All right, well, I've got a couple questions if no one else wants to jump in. The driveway, I'm guessing that's about 24, 25 feet wide. Is there, have you explored whether there's any way to reduce the width of that, at least at the curb cut where it meets the street?
Yeah, that's a good question, Carl. When I look at the zoning, when you have a two-way travel on a driveway that doesn't have parking on either side, it appears the city expects 24 feet. But if we could reduce that down to 20 feet, like you might have for a drive aisle with parking on either side, I think that would be great, and it would be acceptable. With this being a rather small lot anyway, I think narrowing that down and having less asphalt would be good. But I guess there is still the question of whether city zoning is going to be okay with that.
Okay. Shoot, that means I misunderstood because I thought it was 20 feet that it was what it needed to be.
Well, we could look at the language and confirm that.
I think there is language that says that the BAR can recommend a narrower curb cut. But yes, if you guys could investigate that, that would be great, because obviously you have to go through your site plan process.
Yeah.
Another question, I think what Jeff, was asking a question about the parapets, and I think you're showing them as brick, and that is the intention, correct?
Yes, it is. And we haven't had an opportunity yet to explore just how much from, say, a street level you would be able to see those. Obviously there's going to be portions of those enclosures that would not be visible from the street, and so a brick cladding there wouldn't be necessary. However, there are enough places, like if you look at page 17, our view from the southeast, there are places where the parapets are going to be turning and I believe visible. And so it would seem to us that continuing to use the same brick cladding in those locations would be pretty important to preserve this appearance. And we know that that's going to imply some structural work that maybe would not be necessary otherwise, but that's okay if that's the case.
And the wood soffits and the wood underneath the balconies. Do I understand correctly that you intend to drain water through the top surface of the balcony and have it percolate through the undersides?
Yeah, the little section detail there, perhaps it divulges a little too much with the construction approach. It's a little bit of a placeholder, honestly. I think, in fact, we don't really want water to be dripping through or spilled drinks coming through from one balcony down to another. And so our intention actually is to have that balcony floor to be covered. I don't think it's going to be spaced. I think we're going to slope that slightly to drain water away from the balcony and not to encourage it to get into the cavity space. Okay. And so I think architecturally, our intention remains basically the same, which is that you would see a light colored wood like oak as the soffit material on the underside.
Okay. But it wouldn't.
That answered the question.
I think it does. The intention is you're not going to have, I guess, water drips or any sort of warping or everything, because you're going to have the water drain off the top surface, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. Um,
Can I ask
there's a
a
minor question, but your lighting for the little bollards, it looks like your lighting plan may be not quite coordinated with the final site plan you have. This kind of implies well, maybe it is. How are those bollards mounted? Are they in the brick wall? Or are they?
I think the intention with those bollards, Carl, is that they would actually be mounted to the walk, the surface walk.
Okay.
And so there would be presumably, a flexible conduit used under the walk before it's poured. And then these bollards have a base that can be mounted to the walk, and then the bollard itself then kind of clipped or screwed to the top of that.
Okay. And that's not a tripping hazard, or I mean, they're.
Yeah, they are a little more prominent than, say, a sort of a recessed or a flush walk. It's true, but this is based on an early round of discussions we had with our lighting consultant, and so this is what we are going with for the time being as a lighting strategy there. But I understand your concern that they are kind of sticking out there. It's a somewhat narrow walk.
I think aesthetically they're great, and just kind of, I was curious if that was I was just curious.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one where, we'll confront it ourselves as we get further in the process. And if for some reason, we decide to go with a different option, we know that, were this project to be approved, that we would have to update you if there was a change in direction with that lighting.
Any questions for anyone else? Sherry?
Kevin, is your building 36 feet to the parapet? Is that right?
Let's see here.
You've got 590 on one of the drawings, 591, and then
Right.
the
Yes.
parapet and roof.
Yes.
If I can do math, which I typically can't.
Yeah, no, you're right.
And then I know that there are members of the public who are concerned about the relationship between this building and Windhurst. What's the roof line height on Windhurst?
The eaves of Windhurst, they are about 28 feet, between 27 and 28 feet up from the ground level there. And
Okay.
so what you see, if you look at the south elevation,
Okay.
and to some extent you can see it in the southeast perspective, you can see that the sort of the brow that we have there over the stucco portion that extends out is roughly equivalent to the eaves of the house. And so when you get up to the ridge of Windhurst, the ridge of Windhurst is actually taller than this building.
Okay. And is there a little bit of grade change also on that lot from the north to south side, Preston Place?
Yeah. We have some elevations noted on the site plan.
Okay.
And so, for example, you can see along the walk that's at the southern boundary that we are stepping up as currently the grades do, so that the walk can meet with the landing of the stair that leads down into the Preston Court Apartments courtyard. And as you get over to Windhurst, you see that it's about 4 feet. That when you get to the landing at the bottom of the wood stair, it's about 4 feet up from what would be the kind of the patio area, the little terrace area that's adjacent to the south and southeast portion of the new building.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
I do have a quick lighting question. The wall packs, the wedges, the A fixtures along the parking lot wall.
Mhm.
I was wondering if it would just, your perception of brightness is also related to color temperature. I'm just wondering if it would make sense to knock those down one temperature range, like to 2700. Keep your candle, your basic lighting package, but just do that again, just to kind of help minimize that's particularly going down that driveway. Just to help minimize its light bounce at night, because it will bounce a lot of light, that surface there.
Right. Yeah, that sounds fine to us.
I don't think it's necessary underneath the building, although, again, I think the more constant light, color and temperature, the better it is from a visibility standpoint.
Okay.
I have a couple of material questions.
Mhm.
Kevin, could you clarify I'm looking at the west perspective, and it's clear that like in the synapse between the two volumes, there's a lighter colored material. Is that the white oak that we're seeing and that soffit continues into the interior?
Yes.
Okay. The second is about the paving material. It's called out in the drawings as a stone paving. The photo looks very clearly like a bluestone, and the wall cap is called out as bluestone, but the renderings are a little bit lighter. Is there a particular thought about the stone choice? Is bluestone what you're proposing?
Yeah, it is, but that's a good question, Breck. And that's, we haven't picked out a particular stone for the paving on the walks. But we think as this is proposed, it would be similar to the capstones. Now, if we could have a slight distinction so that there was a slightly darker color for the capstone along the walls, I think that would be nice. But we just don't have samples yet of what we might use for those walks.
Right. Okay. And the last material question, also related to paving, is there is an existing, per our previous reviews of this project and per the survey, there is an existing stone patio on the western side of Windhurst. What is the condition of that, and are you intending to either keep and maintain in place or reuse any of that stone as part of that paved plaza between the two structures?
At the moment, we hadn't planned to reuse any. It's in rather rough shape. It's pretty deteriorated. It's whatever its former edges were are hard to discern. But we have yet to do an investigation of that, of that little terraced area you're referring to see if materials there would be salvageable. But with investigation, we could then make a better assessment and decide if some of that could be reused.
Also, one other thing, just sort of keying off of what Carl commented on about narrowing down the throat of the driveway. If you did that, is there a possibility of getting, another tree in there, perhaps? Maybe not full-blown shade tree, but again, thinking about sort of minimizing that sort of canyon effect from the driveway.
Tim, you're meaning like a tree that would be out closer to the street and grow bigger than the
right. So basically, you do like kind of basically a peninsula choke for the thing and get something growing there, because it just, again, I just think in the summer that's just going to radiate a lot of heat.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion.
And again, it just helps minimize its sort of more slightly canyon-like effect. And I use that term loosely. I'm not calling it a canyon, just for record.
It's nicer than some of the other terms you've used before, Tim.
Yes, that's true. It's only 2 syllables too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A question came in from the public, and I just want to read this. So it's from Ms. Turner. So she's asking, when was the side yard of the only remaining formal facade of this historic structure carved off as a building lot? What is the obligation of the owner to preserve the historic structure and setting at 605? Is the current owner developer getting tax credits for the historic property? Thank you in advance for your consideration. Again, it's Ms. Turner from 630 Preston Place. So a series of questions.
I guess it sounds like that question just goes to zoning, not really to architecture, right? Because it's a, it's a lot where this building is allowed, the size and the use. And we're not, touching the historic structure with this building. We're staying about 12 feet away.
It is all the same parcel, correct?
It is.
Okay, it is. And the so the lot hasn't actually been separated off.
No, it doesn't.
Do you know if the owner is going to try to do get tax credits on Windhurst, or are you able to speak to any of his
I
plans?
don't think that's his intention, Carl.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any other questions, or should I allow public comment? All right, we can always come back. So now the public is allowed to ask questions, or I'm allowed to comment. Please raise your hand or press *9. You're allowed 3 minutes, and please state your address and your name.
I see a raised hand from Scott Colley. Scott, I'm going to allow you to talk, and then you need to unmute yourself.
Well, there are 2 of us here, Christine Colley and Scott Colley at 611 Preston Place. Our house is a very old cottage that came about 30, 40 years before Windhurst. So it really is one of the older frame houses in Charlottesville. And naturally, we are concerned about the flavor and the sense of neighborhood as the university encroaches closer and closer. We had a joke in the neighborhood about a wall between the university and us, and yet that wall has been breached. Now that's nothing official. I know about the zoning. Anyway, Christine Colley is here. We both at 611 Preston, and she has a comment.
Yes, this addresses the historic district in relation to the massing and scale and infill of the new building. This is a historic district, and if we are serious about having a historic district anywhere in Charlottesville, it's important to make it financially possible and desirable for buyers to buy and renew and maintain and nurture historic houses. There's no source of money for keeping these houses going, and all of you know how expensive that can be. This house we're sitting in, we bought 6 years ago because we loved it, and then spent approximately the price of the house again. And this is on a house that had a wonderful renovation circa 1970. Houses need attention periodically, especially old houses. And if we make the living experience of the area less desirable by great infill, high density, high concentrations of students, So far, we're getting along fine, but I think if we fill in the areas, then selling the idea to people who would otherwise be charmed and delighted to be part of historical preservation is going to become more and more difficult. And this is part of the thinking behind Scott and I's attitude on this change, and I think a great many of our neighbors as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I see 2 raised hands from Paul Wright again. Paul, I will allow you to talk, and then you'll need to unmute yourself.
Hi, Paul Wright again, still 612 Preston Place. I'm opposed to the project on multiple levels and urge the board to deny the application, as Pegasus flies over top of me, as you hear in the background. The project will cause meaningful harm to the historical fabric of the protected district, allow incompatible architecture with little meaningful reference to either protected structure next to it, and significantly eliminate a historical view of a contributing structure to future generations. In a 6-0 decision, the board stated that a parking lot was not compatible with the individual protected property. It's difficult to understand how this new proposal would not cause greater harm. I was actually in favor of that project, as I've been in favor of every project proposed in this neighborhood except this one. At section 34-335 states the purpose of the Historical Conservation Overlay District is to preserve buildings with special historical, cultural, architectural, and architectural significance. And the most important part of that is which serves as important visible reminders of the heritage of the city. It's hard to fathom how this student apartment will completely shield the protected property from view as one enters Preston Place, does not fail to meet preservation standards on this rule alone. But the proposed structure also will not be in harmony with scale and character of the existing buildings. The building as proposed is out of scale and proportion as it relates to Preston Court Apartments and Windhurst to maximize the number of students that can be housed in this location. A shorter height that establishes a step down from the taller Preston Court Apartments will provide greater compatibility. While the bar does not want to create a replica of historical buildings, it seems that the contemporary style of the proposed building emphasizes a colder, harder, angular characteristics that will not be in harmony with the scale and character of existing buildings and nearby protected properties. Also, the balconies will do very little to do other than diminish quiet enjoyment of the neighbors. The parcel represents a bright line between the university and Charlottesville, and an approval will allow further encroachment into a neighborhood that has been fighting to preserve the historical character for decades. I urge the board to deny the applicant a certificate of appropriateness. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
I do have the letter from Ms. Turner. I see that she's part of, or she's one of the attendees. I don't know if she's able to speak. I could read her letter if she's not going to. I don't see her raising her hand. Well, here, let Larry or Mr.
Very good.
Thank you.
I will, yeah, Larry, I will allow you to talk now, and you need to unmute yourself.
The letter that you're referring to is from Patricia Price, who lives in the building that's immediately adjacent to the construction site.
The White House.
It's in the little white house next to the construction site.
That will have the wall to the parking structure right next to it.
Yeah, my wife is here with me, Beth Turner. We're both at 630 Preston Place. I submitted a group of photographs. I don't know to what degree the members of the board are familiar with this neighborhood, but what I wanted to suggest, and actually I want to endorse everything that Paul Wright just said. I agree, Beth and I agree with him completely. The building is completely out of scale with the neighborhood. The point I was going to make through slides was simply to demonstrate this, that the proposed structure is oriented to the south in terms of what it's picking up on in design materials, whereas from every other direction, if you look at the slides I've taken, it's all two-story family houses. That it is a variety of different kinds of materials. And what is being proposed there is, as a three-story building with these balconies, it's completely incompatible with the neighborhood. It is set to, if you can, I don't know that I can see, I can't do it from here.
Oh, no, I'm Mr. Good. I can navigate to any page that you need me to. So just let me know if you want me to go to a specific slide.
Okay, if you can keep moving forward and keep moving forward. And to the next, yes. I just want to demonstrate that this is an area of small wooded lots. Could you go forward? To the next. And to the next. And then to the next. This is the little cottage that's stopped there. This is the little cottage that's right next to the building site. And you can see how very close these places are. There is a little wall immediately to the right in the foreground. That just on the other side of that will be the driveway into the basement parking garage. It is just, I mean, a matter of a couple of yards max from this house.
It's on the line.
Could we go to the next? And this is the view. The building itself is not an apartment building. So the context in which they are inserting this apartment building is a neighborhood of two-story residential buildings, not apartment buildings, and they are not student apartments. This is a residential neighborhood of mostly professional and retired people. Could we go to the next, please?
Mr. Good, if you
I'm about out of time. These are just the other houses in the neighborhood. And
Show 'em
next,
Scott and Christine's house.
and next, and next.
There's,
And this
Yeah.
is Scott and Christine's house. And again, I view it as completely out of scale with the proposed building, and completely out of relationship to the materials that they're proposing. I also want to say the neighborhood is totally against these balconies. They are a source of constant noise and irritation from the Preston Court apartments. And there is absolutely no reason why they need to be directly opposite our house. That's my comments. Thank you. Thank you for your help with that.
Thank you very much.
May-
Contact is always good.
May I speak?
Yeah, I guess it's two people. Yes. Yeah, sorry.
Yes. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm Elizabeth Turner. I live at 630 Preston Place. I want you all to know that I'm not against housing units, adding housing units to Charlottesville or to our historic district. But I am against this proposal. I do not believe it is appropriate. I do not believe it has an appropriate design. I think the roof line, I think the fenestration, I think the materials are wrong. And they do not do anything to complement any of the other structures. The only structure they want to reference and to emulate, I might add, is the Preston Court Apartments,
Which is a behemoth.
which is totally out of scale. And it does not help. It also is not appropriate to the setting, to the historic structure that this is the setting for, to the hill, to the cedars, to the historic relationship. And it is that relationship with the landscape that I really want you all to think about. The terrace and the house itself need to be acknowledged, and a place can be put for more housing units on that lot if that's what the zoning calls for. But I think the appropriateness, which is your purview on the design and the historic preservation angle, is something that we're counting on you to really think about and to acknowledge. The current owner made it clear to us when he bought that parcel, he was going to build an apartment building there. He was going to move the old house to another lot, and he was going to build build an apartment building. That was, he bought the property with that intent and communicated that to us. He couldn't move the old house. So now he's chosen to ignore it. And he's building this structure that abuts the old house, that takes away from the terrace. The terrace has steps that go down to that side area. Those should be acknowledged. That building has been allowed for the number of years that he's owned it to, the roof is not painted, it's being allowed to fall to rack and ruin. So when he tells you that that terrace, oh, I don't know what the materials are, oh, it's falling apart, well, that's intentional. So I think that disrespecting the house, this design does disrespect the setting and the house, and it does not have the appropriate materials. And those balconies will just become backyard party rooms.
Thank you, Mrs. Turner. Appreciate that. I will, I'm going to read Mrs. Price's letter. There are two qualities that define Preston Place. The first is the variety of architectural styles among the houses and how this variety is held together with within a shared approach, the use of setbacks, creative massing, and detail. The proposed building, however, is basically a large shoebox. It may take Preston Court Apartments as inspiration, but that building features more complex massing and a wealth of decorative detail. And although the new building should not have the same degree of monumentality or ornament, it has so little that it is essentially nothing more than a parallelepiped with some typical surface cutouts. Tim, you're gonna have to help me with what that means. And while I appreciate the attention that has been paid to the landscaping, the design totally ignores the second defining quality of Preston Place, the steep hillside that wraps around. The arrangement of houses, especially on the inside of the street where the new building will be, is varied and picturesque. If you look up from the hillside westward toward the even higher Rugby Road area, the whole effect is that of an Italian hill town. Mitchell Matthews' new proposed building, however, is flat with a strongly defined broad axis and thus imposes a new and large rectilinear complex, Wyndhurst Preston Court Apartments proposed building, onto the irregular pictorial arrangement of buildings that is there now. And if the new building is to be considered as infill rather than imposition, I would like to see a rendering of how it would look next to the property it will abut. I cannot fathom how the current design works, either by style or scale, with 625 Preston Place pictured below. And again, it's the little white house just to the north of the project. Are there any more comments from the public? Last chance. Oh, yep. I guess Mr.
Richard Crozier, I see a raised hand. I'll allow you to talk and you need to unmute yourself.
Hello?
Hi, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I just, as a 40-year resident on Preston Place, I would like to say that I certainly second the motions of a lot of the other residents here. It just seems like the wrong thing to do. And particularly if one considers that the Wyndhurst house is an important piece of Charlottesville history. It is really one of the visible remainders of some rather dark Charlottesville history, slavery for one thing. And I think that if we want to not hide as much of the history as we are likely to hide, we should probably really try to keep that thing visible. Anyway, I don't have too much to add. I think a lot of my friends and colleagues have been a lot more eloquent than I can be. But the other thing I would mention is the balconies on the Preston Court Apartments are almost like a megaphone. I'm 3 houses away. I can stand in my living room at night and I can hear individual conversations from those balconies, and I'm half deaf. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Ms. Turner, I apologize. I need to keep it to not allowing the public to make more than one comment. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Is there anybody else that would like to speak?
She could have a spouse that's wishing to speak, but
all right. How about I'll give you just about 10 seconds if you need to clarify something. Is that all right, Robert?
Sure. Ms. Turner, you're back on, so you should unmute yourself.
Hi, did you mean Beth or did you mean me? I'm Lisa Kendrick.
Well, that's interesting. Your name pops up as Elizabeth Turner.
Oh.
Yeah, maybe if she shared the link with you.
Oh, yeah, that's
when you
what
logged
it
in.
was.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
You get 3 minutes. I'm sorry.
That's all right. My name is Lisa Kendrick, and I'm at 622 Preston Place. And from the beginning, I just feel like it's so important that the house and the property is seen as one. It's not been divided. And so what's happening is we are losing sight of the house and the grounds around it. And I just feel like for a historical neighborhood, the city has to decide, are you going to preserve these? Are you going to stand up for these neighborhoods that you've determined to be significant? We live here. We take care of it. One of the reasons that, he's having great success in renting out the property and wanting to build more for others is because it's really lovely. We take care of it. And you know what? We stay here and he goes home, right? He doesn't hear the noise. He doesn't hear the sounds that happen the more you develop this property. You're just adding to the intensity of the student population here. And it's not just professionals. It is not graduate students that have already expressed a lot of their yayas. I mean, it's happening so intensely that it's like, it's hard. It's just like, it's almost hard to take a breath because of this constant noise that has increased so much by the Preston Court Apartments. They're only half full. They're about to be fully full. And to add another building that is going, and I'm not even sure how many students are looking to put in that building, but it doesn't, I agree with everything that all of our neighbors have said. We live here together as one well-harmonized, well-oiled unit. And, we take such good care of the area that it just seems like we need the support of the city, the bar, to recognize we're trying to maintain this historical neighborhood. And it's just so hard and has been so hard for almost 5 years now that we're looking for support, from the bar. It's like Beth said, we're not trying to stop development, but make it appropriate to the historical site. It doesn't have to be massive and take up all the yard. It could be something really beautiful. And so I'm asking you to just reject this idea that they've presented and to come up with some other idea that is more supportive to the direction that the city is wanting to go in the historical neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you mind repeating your name and your address just for the minutes?
Sure. It's Lisa Kendrick, Kendrick, at 622 Preston Place. We've been here for 25 years.
Thank you, Lisa.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I see another raised hand from Emily Steinhilber. So Ms. Steinhilber, I will allow you to talk, and then you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, I appear to be unmuted.
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, Emily Steinhilber, 626 Preston Place. We are, we've heard from a lot of folks who have been on this loop for many years. We actually just purchased the home at that address about a month ago and have been cleaning up the interior of the home, and we'll get to the landscaping shortly. But what really drew was the neighborhood, and if this building is built as proposed, that will be our view from the front yard. So it will kind of fundamentally change the character of the neighborhood. And what we've seen in our short month in the neighborhood is the close-knit community, and that it is a residential neighborhood. And we have really appreciated that and the character that brought us there and the historical nature of that part of Charlottesville. So I hope that you will consider that in your decision. I know the challenging role that the bar has in making these decisions, and I appreciate your service and your decision. But just thought we would say we appreciate our neighbors who've been in the neighborhood much longer than us, and their views, and yep, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Steinhilber.
I'm not seeing any more raised hands. Okay.
I don't either.
All right, board. Your turn. So someone recommended that I should just go around and call on people. So we'll start with that. Breck, since you recommended that, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, fair enough. I have a number of thoughts. I appreciate the commentary both from the architects and from the citizens, concerned citizens. I agree with some of both of what they have said. I was opposed to the earlier project that had a parking lot on this site, and it seemed that in that case the parking area was not sufficiently deferential to the adjacent house, which is very important to telling Charlottesville's early history. But it also didn't seem like a use that was necessary that was worthy of the damage that it would do to the reading of that structure. I do think that it is possible to imagine a contemporary structure on this site that is complementary of Wyndhurst and that is relative to the scale of the surrounding neighborhood. I think that there are some aspects of this project that definitely do that. I actually think that the materiality and the color that is proposed in the model and the renderings is actually quite a quiet approach towards this site, and it actually recedes quite a bit for its, especially in relationship to the very bright white structure of the historic home. In other words, it kind of pops it out. I do have some concerns about the scale, and I wish I had a little bit more information relative to the adjacent 625 and to the adjacent Preston Court apartments. I just feel like it does sit in a kind of a transitional location within the block, but I'm not sure that we really fully appreciate its relationship to 625. I'm concerned about the removal of the oak, and maybe moreover the way that the drive aisle might be damaging to the experience of the neighborhood. I do think that it's an improvement over what was proposed earlier that had the drive aisle going through the block and had cars parking literally near the foot of Windhurst yet again. So I do think that the approach is a better one, but I am concerned about the height of that retaining wall, how blank it might be, and how close it is to 625. I'm also concerned that while the oak would have to go, it still remains in a lot of the perspectives. So it's really hard to tell what the impact of losing that tree is. They've kind of have to remove that tree, but it's still providing a lot of green in the perspective. So it's a little bit misleading. I'm curious, I'll leave it at that, and I'm curious to hear what the others have to say.
Thank you, Breck. Tim? And
Oh, yeah, I mean, sorry. I agree with Breck in that I really don't have a problem with the materiality of it. It does seem, I mean, I do see where it's a little problematic in the sense of the massing, and that it's, a full-blown apartment building, kind of sliding even more into the district. I mean, of course, that all really started with the construction of Preston Place to begin with. I think the objections to the balconies, particularly facing the side yard toward the house to the north, certainly is very understandable. And I guess one question I have, I mean, one, I definitely didn't feel like the parking lot was an appropriate approach. I guess one question I have, and I don't know how this affects the metrics of this, but whether the wing to the north should say lose a floor, and that, I do think the driveway is, regardless, is kind of problematic in terms of its scale relative to the neighborhood. Whether that means, I'm assuming what's driving that is because it's got to be a two-lane driveway. And at the same time, not having any parking also is deleterious. I mean, they've already got enough parking issues in that area. I'm just sort of torn about it. I mean, I understand the logic of more housing, but at the same time, it is not really housing that is really works with this neighborhood. I mean, it's obviously, this is all a series of single bedrooms and shared common space. I mean, this is student housing. This is not, these are not apartments. And maybe that in and of itself is a questionable item, but that's also dealing with function, which is not our purview. But I think it's really, to my mind, it's about that north edge and whether or not that the massing of that should be reconsidered, and if there's something to be done about the driveway. I think there was an earlier version, I believe, where the driveway went straight into the building, which does get you the gaping maw issue. But at the same time, that would allow the green space in the yard to come down. I mean, I think the way that the existing Deodoras work, and along that edge, it works pretty well. I think the real issue is to the north toward the smaller building, and also just obscuring completely the Windhurst building from that street. It's sort of a mixed bag. I mean, this is an area where the zoning is calling for higher density. So I'm not, I'm a little conflicted about exactly how we're supposed to address that.
And as I do this, if you guys want to, if you don't want to comment or you want to pass and talk later, that's fine. Sherry, you've raised your hand, so go for it.
So I wanted to echo what Mr. Morris said about sort of addressing the neighbors' comments and basically our lack of jurisdiction over a lot of those comments, because this board looks at ADC, Architectural Design Control District guidelines, and we look at the application in front of us and decide whether the application meets those guidelines. We may deal with zoning issues tangentially because they inform the massing and size and other forms of the building itself, but we don't dictate zoning. And we also don't dictate use. That was established when the underlying zoning was rezoned, upzoned in 2003, 2005 by the city, and made, I think this is, forgive me, I think it's medium density, if I'm correct, university medium density, UMD. So I just want to acknowledge that it is quite a change in the neighborhood, but this board doesn't have a say in all of the objections that the neighbors have voiced, even though we may agree with them. I lived on the street. I lived on the street almost 40 years ago, embarrassingly, as a student right across the street from the slot. And at that time, that's 632 Preston, it had just converted from single family a year or two before into a group home, a sorority house, which I lived in. So it was students, and it remains a student housing, as does 630 Preston, as do the fraternities on the far other side, but they are directly across from Windhurst, 606, 608, and also 600. Preston Place is one of the most charming places that you can live in the city. It really is. The variation of architecture, the preservation level of very old structures. It's just a really lovely place. But long ago, the zoning was changed, and long ago started the sort of multifamily intrusion, as one would say, on the Grady side into this block or Preston Place in general, a couple of blocks. So I would note that this application, although it places a new building there, it's not changing. We're not changing the zoning, and certainly I don't think we're changing the use all that much. Like I said, as a student, I lived across this lot 40 years ago. So students have been in this area for a while. I do want to just say that I think there are certain things the applicant's done correctly and done right, and maybe is done in response to preliminary discussions that may have been had last year or just informally. I know that the balconies have been reduced so that there'll be no lighting on them. And they're basically places that I don't even think you could put a chair out there. I haven't looked specifically at the dimensions, but they just give a little bit of, they do engage the street, but hopefully in a good way, but not in a way that maybe people are out shouting and congregating in the same way that the Preston's Court apartments, which are much more ample, allow people to do. The building also it's a large building. The massing, I think, is something that my colleagues have noted. The applicant's done a pretty good job just with articulating the building, breaking it down in its design, including those balconies, which break up the massing of the exterior. And I do agree that the dark color is a nice contrast where the white clapboard of Windhurst it's not competing with the white clapboard of Windhurst. And it shows Windhurst off as best a contemporary building can. The applicants also responded to earlier meetings with us, and that they've relegated the the parking to underground. There was surface parking before, and I would think the neighbors would appreciate that. I do wonder if the applicant might be able to pursue a waiver from the city, which can't be obtained from this board, but a waiver to reduce that lane that goes underneath the building. See if the 24 feet could be choked down a little bit, or just to one lane, considering how few spaces are under there. I don't know how many times you would have two cars, one car going down, one car coming up at the same time. So it seems like it could be a little bit of helped a little bit there. So I think that that's something we could look at just so that we can make sure that there is a decreased impact on adjoining 625. I think those are my only comments at this point. And I would tend to be in favor of this application, but kind of leaning that way, but just because I think for reasons in the staff report that it really does meet the guidelines. I just don't find anything really objectionable about this under our guidelines. If our guidelines were different, our consideration might be different. So sorry for the length of my comments.
Thank you, Sherry. Robert, do you have anything to add? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. I agree with the fellow members. I do feel that this meets the guidelines, as Sherry said, but I hear what the residents are saying. I hear your concerns, which also makes me wonder, has there really been a dialogue between the architect and the residents, because there are so many concerns. And I would encourage you to continue having that open dialogue, because like I said, this does seem to follow the guidelines. But yeah, I don't really have much to add.
Thank you. Andy?
Yeah, I think Robert hit the nail on the head. There's a lot of cities that require the neighborhoods surrounding projects to kind of sign off, or at least, come to meetings like this to voice their opinion as a group. But we're limited in what we can do, and that, in situations like this, it really kind of sucks. So there you go.
James, best for last.
Yeah, so I went over there this afternoon and took a couple laps around Preston Place. I'm hoping the rest of y'all may have done that, but if you haven't, please do. Obviously, Sherry lived there. And I gotta say, I feel that Preston Place Apartments really, it addresses Grady Avenue, right? I don't think of that apartment complex as part of this neighborhood. It's on the same block, sure, but it faces Grady Avenue. It's got sides, and its rear elevation kind of address this neighborhood. It sort of turns its back to this neighborhood. And I do agree there's a lot of student housing in this general vicinity. Like Sherry pointed out, there's a fraternity with a new addition right across the street from Windhurst. And there's some on the other side of Preston Place. I noted on the Sanborn map that it used to be called Windhurst Circle instead of Preston Place Drive or whatever. So I think that, still speaks to the significance of Windhurst as a house. I don't necessarily think that that blocking the, west view of Windhurst is such a horrible thing, just because I don't feel like it's the primary facade of the house. I think the facade that faces the backside of Preston Place Apartments, the principal facade, and then the one that faces east with the sort of bowed part of the facade is really architecturally significant. But those are kind of the two principal facades. I think that for the proposed design, I think the color palette, I do like the color palette because they kind of draw off some of the earth tones that I think are one of the character defining features of that neighborhood. The neighborhood does have sort of an arts and crafts feel, just my quick couple laps, where you do have sort of cottages and houses that are nestled into the landscape all around in that area. And have softer lines, really. I think the proposed project is a little bit more harsh. So as I said, do with the color palette. I guess my wish would be for something here that can both fill a need for adding more housing space, but maybe something that looks a little more residential in nature to better suit the neighborhood. And kind of looking over not the application, but the staff report, sort of the thing that jumped out at me is just in terms of our review criteria generally. City code states that in considering a particular application, the BAR shall approve the application unless it finds, and then point 2, the proposal is incompatible with the historic, cultural, or architectural character of the district in which the property is located, or the protected property that is the subject of the application. That kind of jumps out at me. Like, I don't really feel like this fits in or is compatible with the historic, cultural, or architectural character of this district. So I don't think I would be able to support the design as proposed, but I wouldn't be opposed to something in that space.
Thank you. My 2 cents are, I think this typology is actually fitting for a neighborhood like this. I think we have examples throughout Charlottesville in some of the older neighborhoods where, a 3-story walk-up apartment building does fit into a residential neighborhood. And I mean, just, over in University Circles, and there are some examples over there. There are examples scattered around the Rugby neighborhood, or Rugby Venable. I agree that, with some of my colleagues that I'm frustrated that this is very obviously a student apartment. I wish you hadn't shown us the floor plans, because it's just so clear that that's what it is. But that's not our purview. I'm also disappointed that that's what has become of, the Preston Court Apartments. I mean, it's sad, but again, not our purview. I think, I agree with a lot of what Sherry said. I agree with, Breck on the materiality. I think it's, the brick and the stucco and the color scheme does make it recessive, and I think it fits in a residential neighborhood. The steel on the balconies, I'm kind of wavering on. It's definitely contemporary. It's not something that you find in the neighborhood, but then again, it's attached to iron railings, so maybe that makes sense. I think I'm most bothered by the open stair. I don't think that that's buying you. If the intention is that it looks like 2 buildings, I don't think it does it. I think it's going to look, messy, and maybe make it look a little more like an apartment building than I'm struggling to get the words out, but I think that open stair is not helping the compatibility with the neighborhood. If you just glazed it, I think that would go a long ways. I'm leaning towards approval with some modifications. So I do want to see what you're thinking of with the, how you handle the water on the balconies. I think we've discussed various items that seem like they're not fully fleshed out yet, that it would be good to know. Obviously, when this thing goes through site plan, it's going to change, and it should come back to us. So we know what implications are of that. I'd like to see I think your curb cut is significantly wider than any of the other curb cuts in the neighborhood. So as much as the city will allow, I think you do need to reduce it. And Tim, I think, made a really good point about adding a tree right there. One of the beautiful things about this neighborhood is it's, the tree canopy is very complete, and it would be nice to maintain that. I do appreciate you adding the gum trees adjacent to Windhurst, because that's definitely a hole in the tree canopy that it currently exists. So that will benefit. All right, that's my ramble. I guess we got to figure out how we're going to either move this thing along, or Breck, you've got your hand raised.
Well, I was just going to say that, if we don't take action on this tonight, I feel like there's just a few more drawings that are necessary to really adequately assess the impact of this on adjacent properties. And I feel like a longer elevations with we're getting just little hints of Windhurst, or, just little hints of Crescent Court or 625. I think we really would need to see, I would ask for some longer sections that describe that relationship, because it's difficult to do that with with the materials that are included.
I would agree. I mean, I know in other parts of the city, we've asked even for 3D modeling where you pick up, adjacent buildings and that sort of thing. But, one of the things that ironically isn't apparent by any of the drawings is how much bigger that facade of Preston Place is than this building. So, I mean, it is in a transitional space where, Windhurst itself is a pretty sizable building. The Collies immediately next to it is quite small, and the same is true of 620 or wherever the White House. So you have this major drop off in scale right there, but then across the street on the other side of this building, you've got a large fraternity with a very large parking area. And then you've got a number of houses in the immediate vicinity with quite large parking lots. So to my mind, it's, as much as anything, it's trying to maintain that, as Carl said, that sylvan quality and the density of the tree canopy, and basically embedding the building, doing a better job of embedding the building. Whether that means manipulating the height of the left block, that has some appeal, but I can also see where it would just become architecturally problematic having one of the blocks taller than the other one. And as Carl noted, we really can't address use. I think a number of the neighborhood's objections run much deeper than what the BAR can address.
Carla, if there's a moment here, if I could just comment on some of the comments that were
Yeah.
made, that's okay. Yeah, I just wanted to echo something I think Sherry was bringing up, that the zoning is R3 for this property. So everything we're proposing as far as use, density, size, all entirely appropriate and within the zoning regulations. The one thing that's come up a few times that I should have clarified earlier, the large tree that's close to the boundary with 625, it was misidentified on the survey as an oak. It's an ash, and the arborist who did inspect it months ago pointed out that it is currently dying. It has limbs that are dead, and so it does appear to be at the end of its life. But that's certainly a report that we could include in materials that we subsequently present. As far as talking to the neighbors, a few members brought up how the discussion could be important. I said it in the beginning, but just to reiterate, we've had multiple meetings with the neighbors. We've met with them on site. We've exchanged emails with them. Ahead of this meeting, I sent them a preview of our presentation book. So we've done a lot to keep them in the loop, even though I understand there is a great deal of opposition. As far as the massing of the building goes, I mean, it's worth pointing out that, if you were to build, say, a single family house or a couple of townhouses on this property, you could build them to the very same size. As far as modulating the massing goes, I understand that some personal preferences might be for there to be greater modulation, and I could imagine a project where that would be interesting and exciting. But I guess the question for us is what we're proposing, does it cross a line into being inappropriate or not appropriate? And that's where, that's a bit of a struggle for us to understand how this would be deemed inappropriate for its massing, considering what's allowed in this neighborhood, considering what Jeff mentioned about it's staying within a range or percentage range of heights of nearby buildings. Comments too about the building looking harsh, also a little bit hard for us to assess, when we're comparing it to guidelines. And Yeah, the one last thing that some have mentioned, desiring or wanting to keep a view from the west side of the circle to Windhurst. And I guess I understand, where people are coming from, especially if they're very used to having that view, who've lived in the neighborhood or walked around the circle for a long time. But at the same time, you could argue that empty space that's been there, the grounds that they've been there, it takes a little bit from what could be perceived as a kind of a street wall along that edge, and that this building comes in and fills a space. And I also just, the interpretation that the Preston Court Apartments belong to Grady Avenue and not to Preston Circle, I guess I just don't see that. I mean, the Preston Court Apartments, to me, I look at them and I see three significant facades, and they're in the west, south, and east. So I see it as a building that participates almost inevitably with this circle. And it's worth noting too that in the guidelines for this particular historic district, it's noted specifically that Windhurst was among two farms that were initially kind of subdivided and sold off in the early 20th century, largely for the sake of housing and expanding universities, faculty, and students. And so, again, even though the demographic of the potential tenants in this building are not something that the BAR can address, it's entirely appropriate that there are students living here, and there have been for decades.
Just so I know where we all stand, is there anybody who is they're opposed to this, opposed to a 6-unit, 3-story apartment building here?
I guess I'm not opposed to it. I guess still, and I don't know if he was commenting on my comment, but the word I wasn't using the word inappropriate. The word that I was citing from our staff report was incompatible. So that's where, again, I think I could support the building here. I just feel like stylistically it's incompatible with the rest of the circle.
So James, are you saying that you could support it in concept, but you'd like to see some significant changes?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anyone else in that same boat that, and I'm talking significant changes, things like Tim mentioned, lopping or stepping back the northwest corner, or do they need to completely change the materiality, or is it too big? Is it too close to Windhurst? Is there anybody that falls in that category other than James? Cherry?
I'd say not major changes, but James's comments were very persuasive to me. That I'm at a loss to think of one architectural detail of this building that takes a cue from another building on Preston, except for Preston's Court Apartments. I agree with that. But that to the extent that a lot of the street, as James said, is vernacular or sort of primitive looking and there are lots of different architectural styles, and I wouldn't want, to borrow from all of them one time, but it would be nice if this building reminded us of some of the other really beautiful buildings further down the street. So I am persuaded that not a wholesale, but just somehow that would get me over, I think, I don't know about James, the objection to to compatibility. I also wanted to just dovetail on what you said, Carl. I kind of think that I do agree that stairway, for lack of a better word, and please forgive me, but it's a little, the exposed stairway is a little new dorm for me. And I can say that because I lived in the new dorms, a little, you've got that Motel 6 in the middle. So I do wonder if you just were able to, like you said, glaze it or shade it or somehow obstruct that. at least from the street view, whether there might be a design opportunity in that space, at least with that sort of facade that shields that. But I think I would agree with Carl on that one as well. I also wanted to say with regard to the balconies, it sounds like the group is in favor, but I just, one more sort of hilarious historic, when I lived across the street at 632, I was in the room that has the balcony on it. So I can say that the balconies on Preston have been used for at least 40 years in time by misbehaving students. And these balconies are modest and hopefully they're not nearly as large as the one I was afforded, but that's a reality, a use reality that this board has no say in, so.
I do think, Kevin, that you are trying to put some residential details in there. I think the shutters are a nice addition that does, you've got a contemporary building, but it is kind of, it's a nod that, there are houses nearby.
Yeah, I know there's various takes on this. We were going for something that we viewed as just a rather simple building with materials that we do see elsewhere on the block. And just a concern sometimes that when you're trying to sort of pick and choose kind of quotations from around the circle, it can converge into pastiche in doing that, and kind of cutesy detailing that we wanted to be cautious about incorporating. But it's a pretty eclectic circle, and I think that's one of its virtues. And the Preston Court Apartments coming along in the 1920s really caused a big change, and then even further circumscribing and kind of diminishing the original presence of the historic house are all the houses that were built around the circle and the circle itself. And so it just looks to us like a place where historic fabric is dynamic, and introducing a building that doesn't necessarily kind of be too deferential or take too many cues from what's around it, that there's something to be said for that.
Well, I was going to say also, even if this was a single family house, the way it would probably get developed, if you cut this lot in half, the way it would get developed, Wyndhurst would probably be pretty much blocked from view from the street edge anyway, right? If it was broken up. It does seem like this is fundamentally an addendum to, an addendum to the original big building. But I do think Brett's point about having a better sense of the street scale would actually, I think, particularly in reference to Preston Place and the scale of this building, it would make for a better argument about the scale of your building.
So I want to figure out how we can kind of tie this up in a way that makes sense, because I'm under the impression that we're not going to get an approval tonight. But I do think I want to make sure that Kevin gets the right direction.
Well, Carl, I do want to ask along those lines, because I believe the owner would like a vote tonight, and I guess I'm wondering, if you talk to the group or go around, I don't want to belabor this, if you can go around one more time, if there's a sort of set of conditions, perhaps that might be attached to this application, so that some could see their way to approval.
That is, we can do that. That is risky in that, we cannot have administrative approvals. So, we have to either design things tonight, or it would be better to defer. But yes, we can do that. Well, as a show of hands, who thinks that they could approve this tonight with conditions? That looks like nobody. So I think you're better off requesting a deferral. If you want to vote, I think you know what's going to happen. And we don't want to do that. At least I don't want to do that. So I think you've got enough. Well, Breck, you saying something? Or
Well, I just want to say, I think I'm largely supportive of the approach and what's been designed here. I just feel like I need a little bit more information related to the scale, especially on that northwest corner, and the drive aisle and retaining wall.
And I want to know what you're going to do with the balconies. And I very, very strongly suggest enclosing that staircase. I'm not sure if that's gonna be a deal killer for me, but I think that's really important. Yeah. Does anyone, so Sherry said that made sense. Does that make sense to the rest of you guys? Or I don't want to put something on this that no one else thinks is necessary.
I guess, oh no, I'm sorry. Let other people talk.
I would say besides just aesthetics and compatibility with neighborhood, I would think that an open stairwell would be a noisy place for neighbors. And if, if the consideration here is to lessen the impact on an apartment building, I think somehow enclosing those stairs might be a better way of accomplishing that. That might be a nice concession.
But does that get to points about like behavior and to remark on whether it will be noisy or not? In other words, is that an architectural issue?
Well, it is if you could insulate noise from a street. That's, I don't know. Do we have materials on the stairs?
Yeah.
Metal and wood.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I mean, I liked how Sherry described it. It has a Motel 8 feel to it, unfortunately, with the open stair. I mean, just the connotation that every time I've seen an open stair, it's not it's very rarely done in a way that feels residential or feels, compatible with a neighborhood of this type of character. It feels like something that is cheap.
Well, if you look at the west perspective again, the view west, I guess I'm not seeing cheap there, to put it bluntly. I mean, and I guess I would be concerned that in enclosing the stair with, I guess, some sort of glazed sort of volume, that it might take from the kind of perception you have of these two separate wings of the building, which I think is kind of clearer and crisper in this rendition.
Well, that's why I'm curious if it's just Sherry and I that share this opinion. I don't think you're getting two buildings out of this. I think it's still reading as one with a hole in the middle. But again, that's me. Doesn't seem like there's a lot of agreement, so it could just be Sherry and I.
I mean, I read it as two masses. And if you do glaze it in, you'll definitely, unless you step it way back, it'll definitely read more as one solid block, I think, even though you'd have to get that glass line, I think, significantly back behind the corner of, are they in plane? They are in plane, right, Kevin?
Is what in plane?
Are both facades in plane, or is the one back a little bit? I guess I can look at
the one on the left, or the north one. It is back a bit.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So you'd have to pull whether it's a screen or glaze or whatever, you'd have to pull it back behind that in order to
it's going to be
a sense of separation.
Right. You can see in the floor plan that the landings even project a bit beyond the north wing. And so too would some sort of kind of booth-like structure that includes that.
I guess it's the perspective. I don't know if it's deceptive or not, but it does look very light filled, and it looks like there's like you've got a big skylight in there or something.
I haven't artificially enhanced that. I mean, I know it's an illustration, so it's But there would be lighting in there that would help to kind of enhance this space when people are going up and down the stairs. And I think it would, and I think it's proposed to be something that has slightly higher aspirations than just a fire escape.
Yes, no, I understand it. I mean, you're putting nice materials on here. It just, well, it looks like it's just two of us. So take that as you.
Next, we did approve just recently a very similar approach on the Virginia Avenue apartment building, but I guess it's for the BAR to decide if that detail is if the context has different impact on this neighborhood and adjacent context.
I think that one also had, if I remember correctly, I think the upper level, if it wasn't fully open to the sky, it was partially open to the sky. But I'm not sure that would, for me, I'm not sure that would help here. I think it's the context is what but we're belaboring something that I think is not shared by the whole board.
I mean, my bigger concern really is that driveway edge and just that delineation separating this sort of cleaving the site there more than anything. I do think the massing, once you bring in the other building facade and get more of a sense of the street, I don't think the massing is, all that. I just don't think it's going to seem as big as it does right now. The building's very front and center as we currently look at it, and the building immediately to its left is considerably lower. But once you start taking it in the aggregate, I don't think it's, it's probably, probably the one thing that would soften it maybe would be, if it had a pitched roof on it, but that's also kind of antithetical to the building to its immediate right and also to the aesthetics of this building. It doesn't make sense. So I think it's about working on the street edge and doing something about that driveway, making that less of an object. And maybe that retaining wall has, a planter edge or something like that where it starts to have stuff spill down and soften. And I know one of your elevations you showed vines or something coming down one side. But I think a lot of this can be handled starting to bring in things that just make the detailing more residential and less commercial feeling. And a lot of that is at the street edge, I think.
So Kevin, you've got, I think, you've got pretty good support for the project in general, it sounds like, with some modifications. Do you have questions? Do you want clarity on anything?
I think this has been very helpful. Regarding the balconies, tell me if this sounds right to you guys. I know in the neighborhood there's opposition to them, but they are rather shallow balconies. And my hunch is that if we were to eliminate most or all of them, then it would then create an even kind of greater challenge to potentially incorporating the kind of detailing that would give it a greater sense of scale, to give it something of a residential touch, which some people are looking for here. So I just want to confirm that among BAR members that the balconies are that they seem to be okay.
Can everybody that agrees with that raise their hand? Okay, it's most of us.
Somebody had mentioned possibly not having them on the north facade that would kind of overlook all the, right into the backyards of a lot of the neighboring properties. So maybe that's a consideration, but.
Right. Yeah, I see what you mean there.
And since I've got the mic for a second, I think Tim phrased it really well in terms of trying to have detailing that's more residential in nature than commercial in nature. I guess one of the things I was trying to say, so I want to echo that. And then looking at the view west slide, I think that big retaining wall for the driveway going down, I'm wondering if maybe material there, like consider stone or something, like make that retaining wall not feel like so much like part of the building, make it more natural. I think it's worth taking a walk around Preston Place and look at some of the other landscape features, just because there are like natural stone and wood and things like that.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good suggestion. I like that. Well, I think as it turns out, based on what you guys have said, I think we actually are seeking to defer a vote. But yeah, if there are any, last remarks that people want to make, we definitely would like to hear them.
I don't know what the owner is trying to do, but if it would be nice if you started the site plan process while this is going on, just to get some assurance that it's not going to get all changed on us. But I know that's up to the owner. Sorry, Breck, you go ahead.
This was just mentioned more in the question section, but I do think that western entrance to Windhurst is an important story to that house, and to the extent that some acknowledgement of that terrace and doorway could be made in the design of that interior space. It's very difficult to see kind of what's happening in there, but whether it's either retaining some of that material or reusing that material, I think that would be important.
Yeah, I think based on your comments, Breck, that we do want to evaluate that terrace more so that we can, when we return, fill you in more about it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so the applicant has requested a deferral. Would anyone like to move to accept?
Move to accept the applicant's deferral.
I will second.
Thank you. I will call a vote. Mr. Zemer,
Aye.
Mr. McClure,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Aye.
Miss Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz,
Yes.
Mr. Gastinger,
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
All right, thank you, everybody.
And you've done it before, but feel free to reach out to us if you you want to bounce ideas off individual members.
Okay, I appreciate that. All right, good evening.
All right. Guys, do we want to just try and get right through this, or do we want to break?
I wouldn't mind a 5-minute break.
You want a 5-minute break?
Sure.
Okay, let's do that. 5 minutes.
Thanks. Hi, everybody.
Hey,
Oop, there's Robert. Robert Watkins just replaced Robert Edwards. What happened there?
Carl's hazing.
Oh, there he is. Carl, what, Jeff?
We do look alike.
It's more hazing. Carl's messing with
Jeff.
Robert Edwards. They are hazing.
We only had 6 months. You don't want to make it any shorter.
He's already redshirted. He gets an extra season. So anyway, so
You're still hazing me, and my 6 months is long over, Carl.
actually,
I have 6 months left.
I met Robert the other night in person. He's a big guy, so I'm not. No more shenanigans for me.
Okay. Still waiting on Andy and James. Make sure I've got what I want to say. Still have a little bit of public left. To the public that is here, thank you for your patience. I know that was a long agenda item. Well, it looks like we're all here. So, Jeff, if you could introduce the next item.
All right. Excuse me. You all have the staff summary that I put together, and it's 7 pages long and about 3,000 words. So I'm not going to read it verbatim. And I'm going to let me just move this so I'm looking at you all while I speak. But I will, briefly summarize the request and background section. And I also, I suggest that the document itself be the formal record and not what I might verbally paraphrase or summarize, I let the document be the record. And, but just quickly, on May 3rd of this year, Council adopted a resolution authorizing publication of notice of Council's intention to remove, relocate, contextualize, or cover the statues of Confederate Generals Lee and Jackson currently located within 2 city parks. With that resolution, Council requested that the BAR consider the intent of Council's intent and to provide comment to Council prior to their public hearing, which has been scheduled for June 7th next month. And Council's priority is the removal of the statues as soon as possible. And they may decide to cover or contextualize the statues during a period of time prior to their removal. The statues are located within the city designated North Downtown ADC district. However, neither is designated as a contributing structure to that district. And as such, per city code, the BAR has no purview over their removal or relocation. However, also per city code, the BAR serves as an informal advisory body to Council. And so that we're clear with everyone, it is in that capacity, in that advisory capacity, the Council has requested the BAR's comments and recommendations. So just quickly, some background. The Lee statue was unveiled in 1924, the Jackson statue in 1921. Both are listed on the Virginia Landmarks Register and the National Register of Historic Places. These listings represent state and federal recognition of properties. However, they do not create any legal obligations for requirement for the city or other landowners who list their properties listed in the state or national register. Again, it's only the local designation that brings about any activity by the VAR. As outlined in the staff summary for the past several years, Council has expressed its intent to remove, relocate, contextualize, or cover the 2 statues. And until recently, litigation prohibited the city from taking further action. Back in 2016, Council established a Blue Ribbon Commission on Race, Memorials, and Public Spaces, which recommended the statues be either removed and relocated or contextualized in place. And more specifically, the commission stated the Lee and Jackson statues belong in no public space unless their history as symbols of white supremacy is revealed and their respective parks transformed in ways that promote freedom and equity in our community. This past April, the Virginia Supreme Court released the city from the prohibitions of the legal action. I know I'm not saying that perfectly, but the ruling allowed city council to per the state code provisions, to move forward with its intent to remove, relocate, contextualize, and recover the two statues. Again, on May 3rd, council adopted the resolution authorizing publication and notice of its intent and the scheduling of that hearing. And again, that's when council requested the BAR's input. And following the hearing on June 7th, council plans to offer the statues to any museum, historical society, government, or military battlefield, and to transfer ownership to that entity, allowing for the relocation of the statues. Removal of statues from the city parks will likely result in their being delisted from the state and national registers. However, if they are transferred to an entity that wishes to maintain that designation, there is a review process that allows continued listing to be considered. And finally, I won't get into all of the points offered in the discussion, but the VAR has been asked to discuss and offer comment on council's intent to remove, relocate, contextualize, and recover the statues. Council is following a statutory process referenced in the state code, which requires the statement of intent, a public hearing, and to offer the statues to other entities. Once those steps have been taken, council has the sole authority to determine the disposition of those statues. And prior to any final decision by council, council may take interim steps, such as covering or contextualizing statues before removal or relocation, and or before a redesign of the park is undertaken. So finally, offering comment on the disposition of the statues requires an assessment that falls short of the BAR's usual focus on architectural matters involving landscape and design, et cetera. That said, in our summary, staff has outlined several recommendations from the design guidelines that we think might provide some context and offer a framework for your discussion. And with that, I'll ask, are there any questions for staff on the summary or anything I just said? Okay.
All right, thank you, Jeff. So now is an opportunity for public comment. So I just want to remind everyone you're limited to 3 minutes. Please identify yourselves and state your current address. And just a reminder, as Jeff said, this is not an application for a certificate of appropriateness. We are just acting in an advisory role, offering council advice and recommendations. Council will be taking this up on June 7th. And that's another opportunity for you to make public comment. Your comments tonight will be put into the record, but I do encourage you to speak to council at that time. Let's see. Generally, we won't be responding to questions or engaging in dialogue. Yes, if you would like to speak, please raise your hand or press *9.
I don't see any raised hands, Carl.
Okay. Well, that's okay. So we have the big, long staff report that staff has developed. Does anybody want to add to that, or another option would be to just make a statement based on that report. All right.
Nobody wants to go first? Nobody wants to go, or nobody wants to go first?
Are we going to spend a lot of time discussing this thing that doesn't even require a vote, or none of us really understand why we're participating at all?
We don't need to do that. I think if we wanted to, we could just move right into a some sort of statement on the.
I have some thoughts if nobody else wants to go.
Go for it, Brett.
Should I go? Okay. And I'm pulled together some notes, so please bear with me. Even though we've been, this is the first time that we've been asked formally to opine about the statues. Of course, all of us as citizens have been thinking about this, and as members of BAR for some time, for years. We, per our zoning ordinance, we're a volunteer board that's appointed by city council to act on the community's behalf to preserve and protect the historic, cultural, and architectural heritage of designated districts and properties. And, you know, in short, we act on the public's behalf because there are so many projects, so many design decisions, things that happen on a constant basis. It's way more than the public or even city staff can keep track of or pay attention to. But in this case, this is a project that has had the focus and the attention of the community. And so that calls into question to what we can bring to that process. This has already been the subject of years of conversation, and Charlottesville has gone to great lengths to conduct public process to understand the history of these statues and the hurt that has been associated with these places. And here we have relied on the excellent work of the Blue Ribbon Commission, their report, and the recommendations that they've made to City Council, who as an elected body has made decisions on the public's behalf and on how to move forward. And courts have litigated those decisions, and that's what's led to the current City Council statement of intent. All that being said, we have been asked by City Council to consider their intent and to provide comment. And so I think there's a few things that we can add, some readings that we can either lift up out of the staff report or from our own reading of the guidelines, and also from national preservation legislation organizations that support removal. In our guidelines, in section 1E, number 3, that describes the BAR and the guidelines role in reading our landscapes and fabrics as, quote, physical records of its time, place, and use. Changes that create a false sense of historical development will not be undertaken. So it's important to know, knowing that the National Historic Preservation Act, it states that properties or structures like sculptures that are primarily commemorative in nature, those that are designed or constructed after the occurrence of an important historic event or after the life of an important person, that they serve less as evidence of that particular person's productive life, but as evidence of a later generation's assessment of the past. Essentially, there's been a misconception by some that the statues are themselves historic, but actually they were explicitly created to shape a historic narrative. And that's not my reading, that's the reading, and it's documented by the Blue Ribbon Commission, that these statues as a whole tell incomplete stories, and that they champion false, painful, and damaging lost cause narratives, which would go against the guideline, the spirit of the guideline that's I just described. Furthermore, in section 1, the architectural design control districts, they detail, our guidelines detail and point out properties and elements that define the district. In the North Downtown ADC description, there's no mention of Lee Park or the statues as character defining features. In the sub area of Jefferson Street and High Street West, it also makes no mention of Market Street Park, Court Square Park, or the statues as important or character defining features in their district. So that maybe for some that's debatable. For us who are bound by the guidelines, there's no guidance related to the role that these statues are playing or that they contribute in a positive way to the landscape character of the district. Section 2 of our guidelines, site design and elements, does not address statues in public parks. Section 6, J, number 1, does suggest that existing public art and statues should be maintained. However, the following point, number 2, notes that public art is preferred that offers a placemaking role in celebrating and communicating the history and culture of the districts. And as I've kind of noted already, the BRC report already tells about the misleading and damaging role of the statutes in telling us very specific lost cause narrative, which is meant to include some in the community and to include others, and clearly that narrative isn't compatible with contemporary values. Beyond our guidelines, I think it's really important to note that the National Trust for Historic Preservation, which has really led the charge for historic preservation in this country and historic preservation legislation, has issued multiple white papers describing support for removal of Confederate monuments from a preservationist perspective. And in particular, I'll quote the most recent one that says that the National Trust supports the removal from our public space. The National Trust supports their removals, Confederate monuments, from our public spaces when they continue to serve the purposes for which they were built, to glorify, promote, and reinforce white supremacy overtly or implicitly. So our community has been active in conversation about race and public space for many years, not well beyond us. Leaders in our community, both elected and unelected, have created the processes to facilitate these discussions in public way, and they yielded really careful recommendations. Council acted with the benefit of that public process, and that has been litigated. In short, our community has spoken, and we honor that work. So it's in that spirit, I'd like to propose a text of a statement for your consideration and see if you agree with it or disagree. I can paste the text of it into the chat so you can read it more carefully, but this is what I've written. With careful consideration of our design guidelines, with guidance from respected national preservation organizations, and in acknowledgement of the Blue Ribbon Commission's public process and work to better understand the history and harmful legacy of these statues, we wish to state our strong support for City Council's intention to remove the Lee and Jackson statues and to temporarily cover and contextualize the statues during a period of time before removal can occur. Furthermore, we look forward to working with the public process to understand how the parks may be redesigned in the future in accordance with our guidelines. And I will put that into the chat. Thank you for indulging me.
Thank you, Brick. Does anybody want to amend that, or want to just vote to accept that as a statement?
Mr. Chair, could you give us a few minutes to read this? I don't know, did I miss an email? But
No.
Nope. I have not seen this
No,
wording
I've not-
before.
I've not
I'm
distributed it.
a little slow on the uptake, so I just want to read what was just put in the chat box.
I've
Maybe
not
other members are in the same
distributed
position.
this ahead of time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a slow reader. I don't know if anybody else is still reading, but I'm usually the last one.
I apologize for rushing you. I didn't mean to do that.
So is this, does Mr. does Breck present this? Sorry, you can tell I'm getting tired. Is he presenting this by way of a motion, or like what's the proposed action here? I'm just trying to wrap my head around.
You know,
Next up.
it was really hard to not be able to have had the chance to discuss this until now.
Yeah.
So we're there. So
Yeah.
I felt like I thought we needed language to at least to be able to review and discuss. So I'm open to amendment or conversation.
I'd say whether.
Go ahead, Sharon. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Whether we amend, I'm fine with Breck's language, and if it were a motion or action by us, I'd be fine with it. I'd like to just say the second half. I'm actually much more sort of emphatic about the second sentence. I really look forward to seeing what can go on in these spaces, and I think will be a very interesting design process. Unlike, you know, the removal, as unusual as the removal is, and as awkward as it feels for us to be weighing in on that, the design process of two parks and what could go there is a really neat opportunity for us, and just an amazing opportunity. And I'm excited to see what comes forward from the public and from the city, and to see what improvements can be made, what installations can go there. Yeah, so I think that's the silver lining about, you know, if we're uncertain about what we're trying to do here as advisory to council, I think that the second sentence is sort of more akin to the job that we do normally. And I think our guidelines, you know, help us to do that job in the more easily than what council has asked us to do, which is extraordinary. So.
And I would also just add to Sherry's statement, and that, you know, this has been a really painful time for the city, and being able to help hopefully heal, but also looking forward literally in terms of redeveloping a new future for these spaces, and you know, helping downtown re-energize after, you know, the sort of twin punch of the you know, the rally and then COVID. You know, it's, I think, really important that we make these spaces vibrant, and, or, you know, do our best to, you know, make these vibrant spaces, whether we help with RFPs or whatever. But you know, I think it's a great opportunity. And I think Breck's language works for me. I like how concise it is. And I also think that acknowledging that we want to play a role in the future of the parks is very important.
Just want to, I mean, you know, I don't think any of us are not like-minded when it comes to this, but I guess I don't understand why we're saying the middle part. We're the Board of Architectural Review, and there are comments in there that have absolutely nothing to do with the Board of Architectural Review. And while I would say them personally, and you may say them personally, why are we sending a statement to City Council saying something that has nothing to do with us? I guess, I mean, maybe we're just taking that opportunity because we have it, but can we talk about that for a second? Like, what is our angle?
Well, I think, thank you for the question, Andy. I have been really, as I've pulled together my notes and thought about this, and I've been tried very hard to separate my personal feelings about this from what I feel like is our purview as BAR. I think what's really sinister here is that these statutes make it harder to tell a story of this community because of the false narratives. And so I think that very much in a way, if we're a board that has the charge of working on the public's behalf to protect the historic and architectural heritage of this community, these make it harder, and they have made it harder. And so I think that we have good grounding from our guidelines and from other preservation organizations for that work. So I'm interested in maybe if there's maybe specific words that you feel like are outside of our purview, but I try to keep it limited to a specific reading of our guidelines.
Yeah, I don't have any specific suggestions. It seems, I'm relatively new, right? I've been doing this for 16 months at this point, but as far as I can tell, we've never made personal statements about you know, an object. You know, and again, obviously, not obviously, I do agree with you. But that's my point.
Yeah, and to be clear, when I offered in my discussion commentary about I try to rely on the findings of the Blue Ribbon Commission, not my own, and I tried to say that when I did so.
The thing I was just going to sort of to acknowledge Andy's point, and not to take away from the Blue Ribbon Commission and basically the logic with which Breck constructed this. But for instance, with murals, you know, we don't actually comment on the content, right? We look at scale and color and that sort of thing and try to determine if it's appropriate at that level, but we do steer content. But in this case, the content is pretty unavoidable for any variety of reasons. So I think it's just a more complex than 98% of the things we have to deal with.
And I think it's an important part to include in the statement that, and Andy, you're talking about the thing that, you know, we strongly support the city council's intention to remove the statues. I mean, I think that's important for us to include because I think that is what council is asking us as an advisory body. Is this something that we can support in the context of the Architectural Design Control District?
Is that what Andy was talking about? You weren't very specific on you said the middle part, and I just didn't know specific what phrases.
Well, it talks about understanding history, harmful legacies, strong support, intention to remove. It just seemed, it's kind of like Tim was saying about murals, and we may really like a mural or really hate a mural, but in my limited experience, we never talk about the mural. So whatever, I mean, everything you all are saying is, I'm not disagreeing with you.
No, I mean, that makes sense. It seems to me like, and I think you're right to kind of maybe phrase this in an objective manner, like, is council really looking for us to just, thumbs up or thumbs down? Is it VAR support? Sorry, motorcycle went by.
And that was kind of my point, James. It's like if them asking us in the first place seemed odd, and then we couldn't really find a way to vote on it, which is odd for what we do. And then, part C of that is if all of that, if A and B are true, then isn't just one line saying, yeah, we're okay. Here's the thumbs up from the BAR. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to take your words away from you, Breck, obviously.
That's fine.
Right. No, I mean, I think because what was a little confusing to me was basically city council's charge to us or request to us to consider their intent. And when you really think about the words consider their intent, okay, we're considering it. Like, they didn't ask us to actually opine or offer our opinion. So technically we, I don't think that's the spirit of their request, but maybe they should have worded it better. And so I just wonder if, is it better to give a more straightforward, just objective answer? No.
We could choose, and Jeff alluded to this in his presentation, is that we could also include in the communication to city council the notes and comments from this discussion. So we could have a simple statement and include the notes from this conversation. But that's different for you guys to think about.
So, and if we're trying to have a simple, it sounds like you guys are, you're understanding that we should kind of say yes, no. I don't think you guys are disagreeing with that. So then what part would you take out of that? Because it seems like the dispute right now is just on the whole section, but that seems to be the section that is being, sorry, Sherry, go ahead. I'm confused. I'm sorry.
No, I'll answer your question because we've all been looking at these words. You know, the part that I think we personally may agree with, but that skews political in what Breck has written. And again, like Andy said, I don't disagree with it, but it's where we are opining about what a harmful legacy is. That's where it is for me.
Right.
Because just harmful legacy is an opinion, and that's for me, that's politics, and that's what this board typically does not do.
Is it though?
Not, I mean, I don't know the rest of the board answer. I mean, I feel like council is the direction and policymaker for the city, and then the city manager and staff are supposed to execute on that vision and those decisions. And I don't know. I would ask people that have been the BAR for a lot longer than me, but I just don't remember the last time we took in a position. And I'm not saying this is a political, I'm just saying the language, that language is political because it forms an opinion about what a legacy is. And I don't, sorry to be way too oblique, but what a legacy is very debatable. And people could think that it's not harmful, but it's something else. And I'm not saying a good thing, but there may be another descriptor there that somebody would use that's stronger. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
I guess I agree with Andy in spirit, and I'm trying to figure out how to get to a place where we can all agree on what Breck has submitted to us and get past it. But Robert, I'd love to hear what what you were thinking.
Well, obviously I agree with everything Breck said, and to me, it didn't sound political at all. It sounded like facts. And I'm obviously new, much newer than Andy, so I'm not sure what you guys, how you guys approach murals, but I agree with the statement. I agree word for word that those things not only have brought a lot of pain on people of color, but they brought pain to the city and unwanted international media attention to the city of Charlottesville. And we're still having this conversation while people are still dying in the streets and in their homes. We're talking about a statue. So I don't really care about the wording that Breck used because they're facts. I think and I don't really care why we're even having this conversation. If the Board of Architectural Review has a say, an advisory role to play for City Council regarding these statues, I vote to get rid of them, and let's move on and start healing as a city, as a country, because there's a lot of reckoning that needs to happen. And
you're in the right group. Nobody disagrees with that. I think the question, Robert, would be: is it, on one hand, is it the Board of Architectural Review does not object to the City Council's trying to take down the statues, or is it something more elaborate like what Breck wrote? And we're probably belaboring the point at this point anyway. There isn't anybody that disagrees with this, but it's just what the BAR typically does. And again, you're newer than me, but I'm pretty new too, so I don't know.
I think it's very special.
Yeah, I think Andy, actually, you struck something with me, which what you just said, and it's that we don't object. And I think that the reason that struck me is because people do look to the BAR as a preservation-minded group, right? They see this body as a group that typically tries to err on the side of saving things and preserving things. And so it is a little bit, I don't know if irony is the right word or hypocritical. I don't know what the right word is, but it's sort of backwards, right? We're showing support of removing something that some would see as an historic object. I think we've built a pretty good case of saying like these statues are not listed really anywhere, at least in the city, at the city local level, as being historic objects. So that gives us an out, if you will, but it also gives us a way to say like they're sort of not within our purview. But I think that's the trick, is that I think a lot of people just on the surface think like, oh, it's the BAR, they're there to protect and preserve our historic features and character defining features of the city. Why aren't they saving these statues? And it's like, clearly we know we have our reasons why we're not. And so I think that's, to me, why it's important to chime in, find a way to chime in on this. I think the tricky part is also not setting a precedent where something else 20 years from now, people want to get rid of a building because, you know, this is a crazy example. I don't really have an example. Like, you know, is this setting a precedent to get rid of something else just because of a political view, whatever it might be? Like, I don't know if that makes sense. Sherry's sort of nodding, and I don't know if I'm making sense, but.
Rick.
Well, I guess I mean, I really appreciate the conversation. It's an important one to have, and I think for those reasons that you just mentioned, James, because it is important for us to state the grounding of our reasons of why we object, and that's what I had hoped to do with the statement. And I don't want to undermine our statement by appearing to step outside of what our jurisdiction is. So what I might suggest as an alteration, given the conversation, I had thought that, say, the terms of the history and harmful legacy was related to not our own personal views, but to the Blue Ribbon Commission's report, which was, as Robert says, that's a fact. That's part of their report. That's part of what they do. But it's not necessary in terms of our statement. We could take, say, the first few parts all the way down to the well, no, actually, I like it as student.
Breck, I think the words that you put in the beginning are, that's the reasoning, that's our backup, that's why we're doing this. Because as James said, you know, there are people that will expect the BAR to preserve anything that's old. And there's a lot of research into why it is appropriate at this time to take these statues down. And it's, you know, there is potential for people to argue with us and not understand. And I think it's really important that your statement says, this is why we're doing this.
I mean, my read of this is that better understanding the history and harmful legacy of these statues is the conclusion drawn by the Blue Ribbon Commission and as well as the National Preservation Organization. So we're not drawing that conclusion. We are understanding that conclusion, and that basically, you know, overrides. You know, it kicks us into a different gear in terms of this relationship to these really ahistorical objects, right?
I agree with Breck and Tim, having reread it. So I'll just withdraw any sort of, you know, comment that we should take that out, because I completely agree that's qualifying what the commission did. Like Robert said, that, you know, this was, you know, their findings, it was such an, you know, a comprehensive process. I can't believe this report. I haven't read it in a while, but yeah. So I'm, you know, I don't know if we want to talk about this. I did want to, just because this is on the record, I don't think the BAR is, I don't think we're appointed, and I don't think our job is to preserve history. You know, we're supposed to define what history will be and what the future will be. You know, I'm on here as a member of a commercial, I guess, commercial property owner in a commercial district. I've never seen my job as to preserve anything. So, you know, and I just want to, I'm not saying, I'm singing to the choir here, except for small sheds that, I'm kidding.
Small sheds with bad.
That have windows in them where slaves dwelled. We have to preserve those. I'm serious. Those, we do not get rid of those. I'm serious. But I've but that there's a good reason for preserving that. But I've never seen that as our job. I've seen that as, our job is enforcing the guidelines. And
Right. I guess my point was the public perception of the BAR.
Yeah, thank you.
And as a preservationist member of the BAR, I think my role is to typically push for preservation.
That and also we're a quasi zoning board, James, in case you didn't know.
Maybe not. Yeah.
Well, again, the end result was going to be the same. So, if everybody's in favor of the letter, then there's no reason not to send it. That's not a thing.
So, like procedurally, is Breck's presentation of this a motion that needs a second?
Yeah, I would like to move that we accept Breck's statement as the BAR's statement on this issue.
I think you just did that, Mr. Chair.
Is there a second?
And
second.
And herefore after, it should never be my statement. It's our statement.
Breck's BAR statement.
Should I call a vote for this then?
Please do.
Can I just get a clarification? So we have a staff summary. We'll have minutes of this discussion, and you all have a statement that Mr. Gastinger prepared. So we can provide that statement as a cover, and the minutes and the staff report as attachments, or simply, and I don't mean to over formalize this, but just want to clarify what it is you would like staff to forward to City Council.
I think that makes sense. You've got what could be the BAR statement as the general cover, and then you have the staff report and the discussion as backup. I think that makes sense.
And the staff report is our supporting material, which is fundamentally what our statement is synopsizing and referring to. So I think that's a pretty comprehensive body of information at this point.
If we can scrub the minutes to the part where I started blathering and not making sense, that would be appreciated.
When I joked about sheds, I'm sorry.
Look, this is
on Facebook forever, guys. I'm sorry.
Very well.
Okay, I will. There is a second, so I will call a vote. Mr. Moore.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Zemer.
Aye.
Mr. McClure.
Yes.
Miss Lewis.
Aye.
Mr. Gastinger.
Aye.
And Mr. Schwartz.
Yes.
Thank you. The vote is unanimous.
No, and I know this is something we've been working on internally, and this isn't easy. It is difficult. All of it's difficult, and I think everyone understands that. And but trying to understand that we're saying it correctly or appropriately, that's just not going to roll off the tongue. I mean, so I appreciate the discussion and the hard work, and certainly the feedback that you all have given me and Robert in allowing us to prepare something that a lot of good comments from you all over time have allowed us to present the thing the way we did. So appreciate your patience with a 7-page, 3,000 word summary. So thank you for that. If we can, I have, I know I always put on there the design guidelines as a comment or something to speak to. And you all were correct at the beginning. I still haven't finished transcribing all of the handwritten notes over old documents. My apologies, but we continue to move forward. And and I will also say that coming up in June, we have quite a few window projects on the agenda. So we will certainly have, read up on it. And so that we're prepared for, because I think that they are going to become more common than we would like, but so be ready. Other than that, I have nothing to report. Robert, anything that is going on with HRC of any?
No, we're fine.
Nope.
Oh, yes, May 30th. There's going to be a virtual unveiling of the new Daughters of Zion historic marker. Just if you've been following that, the marker has been updated to reflect the archaeological findings that there were likely many more burials there than previously thought. So there's a new marker that's being installed, paid for by the HRC. Yeah, and there's going to be a virtual unveiling, and it's an annual ceremony anyway. It's not just for the marker. It's I don't remember what they call it, but it's an annual ceremony, and it'll be on Facebook, I think.
Can we get a link to that? Would that be?
I'll send you. Yeah, I'll send you some sort of link once I find it to the BAR email list.
Thank you.
And I guess if anyone cares, there's still the comp plan opportunities to comment, and the steering committee is tomorrow afternoon. If anyone wants to join in as public.
Yeah, there were some odd things last time I looked at it, so I kind of need to swing back through and see where they are with it.
Yeah, there's quite a bit in there. Not quite sure what I'm going to say tomorrow, but I'm going to work on it.
As far as Place, I believe, is trying to go to a quarterly meeting thing, so I might actually make it to more Place meetings unless somebody wants to go instead. But I think right now is the last meeting was quite a bit of discussion about West Main and how that's going to move forward. It's just disappointing that it's kind of really taking a hit. And then I guess it isn't really Place, but I'm assuming everybody noticed the Belmont Bridge is having some budget spasms now. I got a note from Jim Rounceville, my tunnel will be in already. But anyway, we'll see.
So the Belmont Bridge staff has found the $4 million from additional grants from the state. So all that council has to do is approve to spend state money. Hopefully there is not a hiccup with that. I mean, you never know you don't know what could happen, but I don't see any reason that there should be a hiccup with that.
Right. Wasn't there, I hate to bring this up, but wasn't there something, didn't the lighting have a hiccup? Isn't there something going on with the lighting? I don't know.
The lighting will be a surprise when it's installed, I'm guessing.
Yes, that's what I'm guessing.
Jeff is very silent.
Sorry, just reading a question about the guidelines. But I think that train left the station, so that's okay. Let's a point just be made to anybody that's listening, or is that we are in reviewing the guidelines, and that's all of that, including the some of the things that were mentioned during the statute discussion, things that maybe the BAR thinks need to be addressed. So and in section 6 or chapter 6, which is the public places, so there are opportunities for those changes, anything that you all suggest to be addressed during that. So that was just the question that like I said, we'll bring that up later. But thank you. Sorry. Now I'm focused again.
Well, and the opportunity for public comment on June 7th.
Yeah, and I encourage you all, and I said that's when I spoke with the Carl and Breck, the chair and co-chairs, we always do before a meeting. Certainly, there's a lot of opinions, and I encourage everyone to that's an opportunity to speak personally, and I don't. You need to treat this as you've expressed your view. If you've got something you want to say, I encourage you to do that. I'm not sure exactly how that meeting will. It'll be an interesting Zoom experience, but I don't know, we're going to be little teeny tiny dots everywhere. But so mark your calendar for that. If Breck, so Breck and I did speak earlier today. There are sites in the city which I think the BAR could, as a group, champion. sites that are important to the local Black community. Oakwood Cemetery, for example, the southern end of Oakwood was the city's the colored section, and we know there's a lot of unmarked graves there. We know it's in a section of that is topographically not the best. It doesn't drain well. This is something that Edwina St. Rose had mentioned to me. So there are, things that maybe we as the BAR could elevate in visibility with council and say, what about this and how can we approach this? So, again, not in terms of a COA, but maybe there is something in the comp plan about Oakwood possibly being an IPP. So these are things that the BAR has a role in, and maybe can take some leadership on. It certainly would be helpful.
For IPPs, is it required that the owner goes along with it, or is there a method that council can compel them to?
I guess I would say it's, I don't know what happened in the first go round. I mean, my house is an IPP. I don't know what the owners thought back in the 70s, but and it also the kind of the question of, well, what would that mean for a cemetery? Does that mean that, COAs for every, headstone? But there are, I think the idea of elevating the awareness of, and I've mentioned it to you before also with Maplewood, Daughters of Zion, the Hebrew Cemetery, and certainly we're looking out there at the unmarked graves at Penn Park. And these are all burial sites that the city has owned and is responsible for. And so I don't know, just some things we can, can raise, but also just simply the conditions that might be there. And there may be, sites within the community that haven't been recognized that, the BAR can maybe initiate some discussion on. Maybe we won't get Tenth and Page neighborhood as a historic district, but maybe there are sites within there that were identified. Similarly, what we did with the Burley Middle School or Burley High School being listed on the National Register. So I just want to put that out there as opportunities to take the comments that were made tonight and be proactive with them and not just reactive with them. And the BAR is a good place to do that. So, and I will stop being cerebral and pedantic. It's the glasses.
No, it's just out of curiosity, and maybe I can take this offline with Jeff, but you're just speaking about cemeteries. So I live around the corner from Jackson Via Elementary School, and there's on the, which way are we? Kind of north edge of that property. There's a small fenced-in area that has a lot of yucca plants in it, and it's otherwise overgrown by poison ivy. But like something just jumps at me like that might be a cemetery. Like it's pretty small, and I know the Via homestead is right across the street. By a family, so it doesn't show up on the tax map as a separate parcel. It's shown as part of the elementary school plot.
Interesting.
But I think it might be worth taking a look at. Like I'm very, very curious.
I mean, the only two burial sites that I know of down there, and the one you and I stumbled upon in the woods over there on and there's the Goyne Cemetery, and then there's the Orangedale. There's a small cemetery. Like dates of the 1700s. But no, I wasn't aware of anything down there, but I certainly, that's the kind of stuff.
Probably better to do in the winter time, because I think it's, like I said, it's probably mostly poison ivy right now. But, when you see the sort of decorative plants like yucca and periwinkle and things like that, those were often present in early cemeteries. So
I usually think snakes first, but
that too.
We'll go out with pots and pans. That usually works. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, y'all.
Have a great evening.
Bye, everyone. Good night.